There is a woman in a care facility outside Albuquerque, New Mexico, who will turn 98 years old in the spring. Her name is Eleanor Ruth Haskell. She was born in Lamar, Colorado, in the autumn of 1926, the second daughter of a postal worker and a schoolteacher, and she completed her practical nursing certification at St. Mary Corwin Hospital in Pueblo in the early months of 1947. By the second week of July of that same year, she had been assigned to the base hospital at Roswell Army Air Field under a temporary staffing arrangement. In the personnel documents her daughter requested through the Freedom of Information Act in 2019, Eleanor's name appears on a single intake log dated the 5th of July 1947. The next record bearing her name at Roswell is dated the 23rd of that same month. 18 days are missing from the record. Eleanor has spoken publicly about those 18 days twice in her life. The first account was given in the autumn of 1994 to an independent researcher named Paul Gareth, a former military archivist who spent the final 12 years of his career documenting first-person testimony from individuals present at or near Roswell during the summer of 1947. Gareth died in Phoenix in 2003. A portion of his collection, including the recorded interview with Eleanor, is held in a private archive in Tucson under restricted access. The second account was given in November of 2023 to a journalist writing for a private research publication who confirmed in writing before the interview that Eleanor's family had been informed and had consented on her behalf. Eleanor gave her own consent separately, and she was specific about her reasons. She is 97 years old. She does not intend to die with this account unspoken. Her account has not changed in 30 years. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. What Eleanor described to Paul Gareth in 1994 and confirmed in every material detail to the journalist who visited her in 2023 begins on the night of the 8th of July. She was summoned from her regular ward duties to a room at the eastern end of the base hospital that she had not been assigned to before that evening, and had not, until that moment, known was in use. The instruction she received was verbal, delivered by a corpsman she did not recognize, who told her to come quickly and to bring her monitoring kit, the blood pressure cuff, the stethoscope, the instruments she carried for any patient assessment. She was not told who the patient was. She was not told what to expect. She walked the corridor from the main nursing station to the door at the end of the eastern wing, and she has described that walk in both accounts with a precision she attributes to the heightened state she entered the moment the instruction was given. She counted the overhead lights. There were 7 of them between the nursing station and the door at the end. One was flickering, the 4th one down, and she remembers thinking that she ought to report it to maintenance before her shift ended. This detail, the 7 lights and the one that flickered, appears in both the Gareth recording and the 2023 interview with identical phrasing. It is the kind of detail that lodges in a mind when everything surrounding it has been removed. The room was occupied when she entered. 2 men in military uniform stood near the door. She did not recognize either of them, and she never saw them again after that night. A third man, in clothing she would later describe only as civilian, stood near the far wall, holding a clipboard. He did not look up when she came in. On an examination table beneath 2 fixed overhead lights, positioned near the center of the room, was a figure she registered, in the first fraction of a second, as a small child. It was not a child. The being was roughly 4 feet in height. The proportions were, in Eleanor's word, wrong, and she locates the wrongness not in any single feature, but in the relationship between features, the way the eye was pulled back to the head each time she tried to take in the rest of the body. The cranium was large relative to the torso, not dramatically, but enough that the proportion registered immediately in the part of the mind that processes bodies before the reasoning mind has time to engage. The skin was smooth and carried no color she can describe with precision, only that it was pale in the way that holds no warmth, the gray of a winter sky before snow. The arms were long, The hands were folded across the lower abdomen in a posture that Eleanor described, in both accounts, as deliberate, as though someone had arranged them that way, though she did not believe anyone had. The eyes were closed. The chest, if it was moving, was doing so at an interval below what she could detect by observation alone. She crossed the room. Nobody told her to cross the room, and nobody told her to stop. She went because the patient in front of her required assessment, and that was what she was there to do. She placed 2 fingers on the inside of the being's wrist, which is what she had been trained to do with any patient presenting as unconscious, and she found the wrist cool and dry, and she found something moving in it. A rhythm she could not map onto any physiological interval she had learned, but also could not dismiss as nothing. She held her fingers in place and watched the second hand of her nursing watch, the way she had been taught to watch it in any assessment where the normal signs were unclear, and she counted. The eyes opened. They did not open gradually, the way human eyes open when consciousness returns from sleep or sedation. They opened the way a shutter opens, complete, immediate, and entirely present. They were black from edge to edge, without visible iris or sclera, and they caught the light from the 2 overhead fixtures in a way that made what was behind them impossible to read. They found her face, and they held it, and Eleanor has spent 3 decades trying to find the right description for what that attention felt like, arriving finally at this. It was the most complete attention she has ever been the subject of. Not aggressive, not searching, complete, as though there was nothing in the room for it but her. She did not move. She cannot fully account for why she did not move, other than that her body had made the decision before her mind finished processing the situation, and the decision was to remain still and to continue being present to what was in front of her. She held her fingers on the wrist. She continued to count. Then she felt something she does not have adequate language for, and this is the section of the account she approaches most carefully in both interviews, slowing her delivery, choosing each word individually, aware of what she is claiming, and determined to claim it as precisely as she can, rather than as simply as she can. She felt a question, not words, not sound of any kind, not a sensation she can attribute to her own nervous system responding to an extraordinary situation. She describes it in both accounts as a shape, a quality in the space between herself and the being that carried the structure of a request, without carrying any language she had ever been taught. She says it arrived complete, the way comprehension sometimes arrives before the mind has worked through the component parts. She does not say she believed she understood it, or thought she might have understood it. She says she understood it. What it was asking for is the part she cannot fully translate. She has tried for 76 years, and what she offers is this. It wanted her to stay, or it wanted to not be alone, or it wanted something she can only locate in the territory between those 2 things, in the distinction between presence and witnessed presence, between being in the room with something that is dying and being in the room for it. She says this distinction felt important in the moment, that the request was not for her body to remain where it was, but for something more specific, for her attention, for her continued acknowledgement of the being as something that was still there and still registered. She translates it, with the caveat that translation loses something irretrievable, as, "stay with me." Those are the 3 words she returns to in both accounts, "stay with me." She knows they are approximate. She stayed. She remained beside the table with her fingers on the wrist, and she did not leave. The black eyes held her face. The civilian at the far wall continued to write. The 2 men near the door had turned their attention to the corridor outside. Nobody in the room spoke. The being died during the hour that followed. Eleanor is uncertain how long she stood there before it ended. She did not look at her nursing watch again. She was not counting any more. The civilian at the far wall eventually stopped writing and simply stood with his clipboard at his side, and the 2 men in the doorway had returned from whatever they had been attending to in the corridor, and the room was quiet in the way that rooms become quiet when everyone in them is waiting for the same thing without saying so. Eleanor cannot identify the exact moment because the rhythm in the wrist faded so gradually that there was no single instant at which she could say it was present and then it was not. She knows it ended because the quality of the attention behind the open eyes changed. She had sat with dying patients before. She was 23 years old, and she had already learnt, in the way nurses learn it and cannot unlearn it, what it looked like when the thing behind someone's eyes departed. She recognized it. Within 20 minutes of that recognition, she was moved out of the room. Not physically, not by force, but directed, with a firmness that did not invite question, by a man she had not previously seen who wore clothing she describes only as not a uniform, who told her she would need to speak with someone before she returned to her duties. He guided her to a different room on the same wing. She waited there for approximately 2 hours. When someone came to speak with her, the man gave a rank she no longer recalls with certainty, and a name she was not given time to retain. He asked her to describe what she had observed. She described it. He did not write anything down while she spoke. When she finished, he told her that what she had witnessed was part of an ongoing investigation, and that she was not to discuss it with anyone, including her supervisors, including her family, including any other medical personnel she might encounter. He told her she had served well, and that this would be reflected in her record. It is not reflected in her record. Her daughter Patricia's FOIA request in 2020 returned a service file that contains no commendation, no citation, and no indication that anyone with authority over Eleanor's service documentation was ever aware of what she was doing during the days bracketed by the gap in her assignment log. The gap itself is not annotated and not explained. The intake log showing her arrival on the 5th of July is present. The duty roster showing her return to regular assignment on the 23rd is present. The 18 days between are simply not there. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. Eleanor did not speak of the room, or the being, or the request for 47 years. She told Patricia in 1991, in the months following her husband's death, when she was, by her own account, taking careful stock of what she intended to carry alone to the end of her life, and what she was prepared to set down. Patricia did not receive the account with disbelief. She received it with a recognition she has described in a written statement provided to the researcher who visited Eleanor in 2023, that she had spent her entire childhood aware of a reserve in her mother that was not coldness but containment, a deliberate distance between Eleanor and any conversation that turned toward the summer of 1947, a subject Patricia had learned, by the time she was in her early teens, not to approach directly. When Eleanor finally spoke, Patricia recognized the shape of what had always been there without knowing what it was. Eleanor is not the only witness whose account, from those rooms in July of 1947, describes this kind of directed communication from a living, recovered being. In 1993, a retired Air Force corpsman named James Tyrell gave a recorded statement to a researcher named Carol Whitmore, who spent the late 1980s and early 90s documenting accounts from individuals present in the New Mexico theater during the 1947 recovery operation. Whitmore relocated to Canada in 1995, under circumstances that her former colleagues have described variously as personal and sudden, and she has not participated in research activity in this field since. Tyrell's statement, which exists in a private collection, describes a moment during the transfer of one of the recovered beings in which he was briefly the only individual in physical contact with the being, while those around him were occupied simultaneously with the movement of a second body between vehicles. During those moments, he experienced what he calls a pressure in the chest, which he was careful to distinguish from a physical sensation, identifying it instead as the unmistakable sense of something being directed at him specifically. He used the word implored. He said the feeling lasted approximately 15 seconds and that it ended at the moment the being's eyes closed, and that he understood, without being told, that it had died. Tyrell and Eleanor had no documented contact. Their accounts were collected by different researchers in different years. Tyrell did not see the Gareth recording. Eleanor had not encountered any account similar to her own until the journalist who visited her in 2023 showed her a portion of Tyrell's recorded statement during the interview. She read the words "pressure in the chest" and "implored," and she sat quietly for a long moment. Then she said, "He was there too." Not that the accounts resembled each other, not that what he described sounded similar to what she had experienced. She said he was there, with the tone of someone confirming a factual detail rather than drawing a parallel. A third account exists in the Gareth collection, attributed to a civilian nurse identified in the available documentation only by her role and the location, the secondary examination site. Her written statement is partial. Several pages are missing entirely. The pages that remain show significant water damage that renders portions of the text illegible. What can be read describes a being that was alive on arrival, whose eyes were open, and who, in the witness's own words, seemed to be trying to give something to the people in the room. Trying to give something. 3 accounts. 3 separate witnesses documented by different researchers with no established collaboration between them. 3 separate descriptions of a living, recovered being directing something at a specific individual in the room, not at the group, not reflexively at whoever was nearest, but at a particular person. The selection, when the 3 accounts are placed beside each other, does not appear random. Eleanor was at the table with her fingers on the wrist. Tyrell was in physical contact during the transfer. The civilian nurse at the secondary site was, by her own description in the damaged pages, the only person in that room who had stopped moving at the moment the eyes opened. All 3 were still. All 3 had made themselves, whether by training or instinct or simple chance, available to be addressed. The pattern is not one of beings registering pain or responding reflexively to the presence of human observers. It is not the profile of organisms producing involuntary communications under stress. The pattern that emerges from 3 independent accounts, documented across a span of years by researchers who were not in contact with one another, is one of beings selecting, in whatever cognitive capacity remained to them, a specific individual and directing something deliberate toward that individual. And what was directed, in each of the 3 accounts, was not information about location or origin or the nature of what had happened. It was a request, personal, directed, and unmistakably understood by the person who received it. What does that require of the official record, if the testimony is taken seriously? It requires that what happened in those rooms in July of 1947 was not only a recovery operation, not in the narrowest sense of that phrase. It requires that something else was occurring alongside the institutional response, something that the witnesses who were present registered in their bodies and in the part of the mind that processes contact before language arrives, something the immediate institutional response moved to contain before those witnesses could compare what they had understood. Eleanor's witness statement was taken before she left the base. It is referenced in an intake log dated the 9th of July 1947. The statement itself does not appear in any document produced in response to her daughter's FOIA request. The reference is there, the statement is not. There is a slot in the record where it should be, and the slot is empty. This is the texture of the Roswell record at its most consistent. Not denial that can be challenged through an appeal process, not redaction that leaves the shape of what was removed visible around the edges. Absence. Clean, unapologetic, precisely located absence, in exactly the places where the record should be most substantial. Eleanor's 18-day gap. Tyrell's account in a collection without institutional access. The civilian nurse's partial statement, water-damaged and missing its final pages, held in an archive that was never formally catalogued during Gareth's lifetime and has been only partially catalogued since his death. The evidence does not thin in random places. It thins where the witnesses were most present and where what they witnessed was most direct. Eleanor is 97 years old. She is alert and she is consistent, and her memory of the second week of July 1947 is, by the account of everyone who has spoken with her about it in the past 3 decades, precise and unambiguous. She knows what she felt beside that table. She knows that the description she can offer will fall short of the thing itself, and she offers it anyway, for the same reason she has decided to offer the account at all, because accuracy matters more to her at 97 than comfort, and because the alternative, dying with this account inside her, is something she decided against 30 years ago when she told her daughter, and has been committed to reversing ever since. She stayed, she says, because it was owed. She does not specify owed by whom or on what basis, or whether owed is even precisely the right word. She uses it because it is the most accurate word she has access to. The alternative, that it made no difference whether she stood beside that table or walked out of that room, does not account for what she felt when the request arrived. Something was owed to what was dying in front of her. She honored it. She has lived with that fact for 76 years, and the living with it has not diminished it. The eyes did not close when it died. Eleanor did not look away. This appears in both accounts with identical phrasing, and she says it with the directness of someone describing a professional act. She did not look away because she was trained to attend to dying patients, and this was a dying patient, and what you owe a dying patient, at minimum, is the acknowledgement that their departure is witnessed. She gave what she could give. She was 23 years old, and she was the only person in that room who understood what it had asked for, and she made certain it received it. What she carried out of that room has no place in any official record. No file, no citation, no notation of any kind indicates that Eleanor Ruth Haskell was ever in that room, or that the being in that room was alive when she entered, or that it directed anything at her in the hour before it stopped being alive. The record contains only the gap, the 18 days that are simply not there, unmarked and unexplained, between her arrival at Roswell and her return to regular duty. She is telling this now because she has decided the account should not disappear when she does. She was instructed not to give it. She is giving it anyway, at 97, in a care facility in Albuquerque, in the precise and careful words of a woman who has spent a professional lifetime observing and recording what she observed. She is not asking to be believed, she is making the record available. What was in those rooms was alive, and it knew it was dying, and it chose, in whatever time and capacity remained, to reach toward the nearest human consciousness and ask for something. Across at least 3 documented accounts from the summer of 1947, that is what the testimony describes. Not a transmission of coordinates, not a statement of origin, a request, from a mind in its last hours, directed at the person who happened to be still. Eleanor has carried that request for longer than most people are alive. She is setting it down now, in the only way available to her, by passing it to anyone willing to stay with it long enough to hear it. She stayed with it when it mattered most. She is asking us to do the same. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.